Hello, my friends. I am Katie Taylor. I am a certified child life specialist, and I'm so honored to be able to bring you this podcast episode today. We will dive into our story in just a quick second, but I wanted to do a little bit of, for me, just a check-in about why we're here, why we have done this podcast for 7 years, why we continue to come back and share stories. And for me, the personal transformation that I went through in becoming a parent was like none other that I had gone through before. It changed me on the inside, definitely changed me on the outside, and it also changed the way in which I showed up to work. I showed up to work not only just there to support children and families, but I had a deeper connection to the work that child life specialists do with parents. And one thing that I continued to see over and over again was that the parents who were supported and felt equipped about what was about to happen and know what to expect often had a leg up on other families who hadn't been there before, or this was their first time experiencing something. The other families didn't know what to ask for. The families who had been there before or had opportunity to work with a child life specialist, they just functioned differently in the hospital because there was a deep sense of understanding, protection, and safety. And so that's why we're bringing you this podcast, so that you can hear other parents and what they've gone through, so that you can learn, you can adapt, you can practice what they've done before, so that you get a leg up and the next time you go into a medical experience with your child. Today's episode is such a powerful testament to the strength and resilience that medical parents face. And today we'll be talking to Kim, whose story will definitely resonate with you if you're a parent who has faced any kind of uncertainty or fear as it relates to your child's chronic illness. Kim is not just a dedicated mom. She's also the executive director of a national nonprofit that supports families dealing with chronic pain. Her journey began with not only one, but two sons who were diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. And there are incredible challenges that followed that diagnosis. This may be one of the biggest transformations I've ever seen when it comes to listening to a parent discuss what their child had been through and what their transformation as a parent was like. Because before, when her child had this diagnosis, dealing with chronic pain and having a hard time even walking, he now plays in the NFL. It's just truly extraordinary. So Kim shares how her world was turned upside down dealing with this excruciating pain. But what stands out in her story is how she became a fierce advocate. She started trusting her instincts, pushing for answers, and eventually finding a path to healing. In my conversation with Kim today, you're going to hear about her desperate search for answers, the life-saving care that she got at UCLA, and her story is one of unwavering determination, complete love, and the importance of trusting your gut as a parent. Let's go ahead and get started.
For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you, and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today. Okay, y'all know how passionate I am about finding the best resources to help normalize medical experiences for kids. Well, today I've got a fantastic book recommendation for you, and it's perfect for your family. What's an IV by Melissa Fatal, a child life specialist, and Rosemary Pang, a nurse, is a new favorite children's book of mine, and it's all about preparing kids, and yes, I feel like it could apply to even adults, for an IV. This book does an amazing job of explaining the IV process in a simple and reassuring way, with very accurate but not at all scary illustrations of the IV needle, the straw, the tape, the whole thing. The goal of What's an IV is to ease anxiety and help kids feel more comfortable in an unfamiliar environment. It's a beautifully detailed guide that takes you through every step of getting an IV, making it a must-have for every family and hospital system and child life team. You absolutely need stacks and stacks of this book.
Grab your copy of What's an IV by going to www.mymedicalprocess.com, and you can follow My Medical Process on Instagram. Trust me, you're going to love this book. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and/or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. I would love to just kind of start by learning a little bit about you, Kim, and your life. And I got the background on that you have an NFL player son, which is so incredibly cool, and that you live in Florida and you're in Texas, so you're not too far from me right now. But tell us a little bit about you.
Well, currently I am the executive director of Creative Healing for Youth in Pain, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's based out of California, but it's a national nonprofit charity that is all completely online, that provides resources for adolescents and their caregivers, ages 13 to 24, and their families for dealing with chronic pain. I got there kind of in a long roundabout way. I had two kids that had juvenile arthritis diagnoses, one that was very chronically and also critically ill at some point, in and out of the hospital homebound school. And, the one thing that he always said to us is, I really don't even care about some of these diagnoses that I have. The one thing that really affects me, whether I want to be here or not, is this constant pain. And, the doctors seem to be very focused on getting to the root cause, understandably. But for me as a mom, I started getting very interested in the chronic pain world, because that seemed to be the number one issue that was affecting our life so deeply. And that's kind of how I started off with the chronic pain area. Before that, I was a full-time mom for many years. But then when my kids were little and I could kind of just throw them in the car and go wherever I wanted to go, we didn't have to worry about school. I was also the executive director for an organization called Nurses for Newborns of Tennessee, another nonprofit. So I've kind of spent my whole life in the nonprofit world, either as a grant writer or executive director or volunteer in whatever way. I was also an NFL wife for 13 years. So we did a lot of charity work in that area too. So that's kind of where I've lived my whole adult life.
Wow. Yeah. What you're saying makes so much sense, because the truth is that if you're watching your child in pain, you'll do anything to take it away. And like you said, the medical team is looking for the root cause. Why is it happening? But as a mom, you want the pain to be gone. You want it to be managed, and to see your child struggle is so, so difficult. It's so interesting to me that this level of pain that your son had, and now he is clearly thriving. So I love kind of where this story went. But take us back to some of those early days and finding out that something was going on. Is this a condition that was in your family and you were kind of paying attention to, or was it something totally new for you?
No, when he was about 2 years old, he started walking with a little bit of a limp and putting his hand on his back and kind of, gimping around. And when I went to the doctor, the pediatrician, and tried to talk to him about it, they were like, oh, his dad is an NFL player and he sees him hobble around after game days and he's just mimicking behaviors. That's where we started. But, the one thing that I would tell all parents is 100% trust your gut. If your parent radar comes up and it says, this is not right, keep pushing, get a second opinion. It's hard when you've got a really young child and you don't know if that is the case or not, that they're just trying to emulate their parent. But I switched pediatricians, and the pediatrician that I had next said, let's just do an MRI to be safe. And sure enough, it came out and showed that he was showing signs of juvenile arthritis already. So that kind of put us into, a time of alert and, kind of like high octane
right
methods to try to get this under control, because that's a pretty scary thing. Most people think of arthritis as something that, your grandparents have or, your parents have, but not something that a 2-year-old may have. And he had a systemic type, so he would run really high fevers, and we have no idea what kind of triggered the onset of it, but it was there. But we managed to get it under control pretty quickly by the time he was 3. And then year after year, we'd see the rheumatologist maybe once a year, and it just wasn't an issue. So we counted ourselves as one of the lucky ones and, almost forgot about it. Then by the time he was in the 4th grade or so, he started showing signs of having some issues. And it was on the heels of contracting the H1N1 virus, which, most people know as swine flu. We were living in Chicago at the time, and it was a huge outbreak. They even closed the public schools, and he just could not get well after that. And then, one day I was tucking them in bed and I noticed his ankles, which he had been complaining about, but his ankles were the size of baseballs. And I said, okay, now I need to definitely figure something out, talk to his pediatrician. We tried to get in to see a rheumatologist, but arthritis is one of those things, even though it's fairly common, 1 out of every 300 kids in the US has some form of autoimmune disease or juvenile arthritis. And at the time, there were only 300 pediatric rheumatologists in the entire country. So when you think about those numbers, over, 300,000 kids, 300 doctors.
Right. It doesn't,
not all of them fit with your
mathing.
family. Yeah. Not all of them fit your family or your lifestyle or what you would think is a good treatment plan for your child. It's very frustrating. And then we found out that he was not able to even get an appointment with the rheumatologist for 8 to 9 months. That was the wait list, even with an active flare and a pediatric referral from his primary care doctor. From there, things just kind of spiraled way downhill. Within 2 months, he started blistering all over his body. They believe it was Stevens-Johnson's disease and had some other, ancillary issues from the juvenile arthritis. And it put him in the hospital off and on for 4 months. And that's when we actually got to see a rheumatologist for the first time, when he was so ill that he needed to be hospitalized. At one point, they told us that he only had a 50-50 chance of making it through the night. They were afraid that he was going to lose his life. He had liver issues. He had neurological issues. Within just a few months, he lost the ability to walk. He was in a wheelchair, and he was in excruciating pain all the time. And it just didn't seem like we could reel it in and get it under control. We were very fortunate in that I could do a lot of research, and we had the means, because we were an NFL family, that I could pick up and take him to a specialist across the country. Yeah. That's when I learned about the team at UCLA and Dr. Zeltzer in particular, because one of the things that he had said to me was, I almost don't care about all these other things that I'm sick, and he was taking, chemo treatments at the time. I mean, he had 30 different diagnoses at that point. And he said, the thing that makes me say, let's give up or let's keep going is, 1, I want to try to be a football player, but 2, if I could just not hurt for a day, if I could just feel better for a day. And, it just broke my heart, because at this point we had been going through it for almost a year, inpatient hospital, outpatient hospital. At one point, he was getting blood draws every 15 minutes while he was in the hospital, because they were testing his liver. I thought, what, this is the one thing that he needs to have the strength to keep going. So I started seriously looking into pain management. And that's when I came across Dr. Zeltzer, who's kind of known as the mother of modern pediatric pain medicine. She was ranked one of the top 3 pain clinicians in the world at the time when we went. And I called, and she had a 2-year wait list. Then I got a call a couple weeks later and said, we've got a cancellation for tomorrow if you can be here. She's in LA. We were in Chicago. I packed him up. We got on a plane. We got there with like 15 minutes to spare. And everything started getting better from there. She helped us pull a team together at UCLA where For the very first time, every one of his specialists was in the same room together with us, not examining him like he was, a lab rat or anything, but having his files there, asking him questions, asking me questions. Neurology cooperated with gastroenterology, who was cooperating with rheumatology and the pain clinic. And we were able to cut so many medications or switch medications because this one was counteracting this one. And these doctors weren't working with each other or speaking with each other. And for the first time, they treated him as a whole child rather than a series of different organ systems. Within a year, he was able to go back to school. Within 2 years, he was in medicated remission. Within 4 years, he was in non-medicated remission, and he was back in school full-time, playing football at one of the top 5 high schools for football in the entire country. His senior year, he had 28 D1 offers, got a full ride scholarship to Vanderbilt, finished there in 3 years, got another scholarship to Baylor, went to Baylor, won a Sugar Bowl, became the Big 12 champion for life for everything that he had gone through he was in a wheelchair at 11.
Wow.
And a full ride scholarship, 2 degrees with, normal eligibility. He had an extra COVID year, but earned a bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt, earned a master's degree from Baylor, and then became an undrafted free agent for the Los Angeles Rams last year. And now he's in his year 2 with the Los Angeles Rams.
Oh my goodness. I actually brings tears to my eyes to watch you just have this joy as you're speaking about what he went through and where he is now. And what just keeps coming to mind is this constant that he had in his life, and that's you. And how you helped him navigate. You were willing to get on the plane that day. You sacrificed so much, not only just regular sacrifices, but of yourself too. How important is it that parents know how to communicate with the care team and know how to support their child?
It's really important, but it can also be a very delicate, fine line. I had before I went to UCLA, I had some doctors that thought maybe I had Munchausen's because I kept saying, this is wrong, this is wrong. The labs for this would be coming back and he'd still say he had so much pain. Or they'd say, the meds are working and we don't want you to take him off meds. Like he did not do well with methotrexate, for example. And we tried a couple of other meds like Glucorvin, but it just never seemed to be working well with him. And I kept saying, this isn't right, this isn't right. And they looked at me as like that crazy mom. Well, it came to pass that he actually had growth hormone deficiency that we did not realize that was a result of the autoimmune disease attacking his pituitary gland. And he needed a growth hormone replacement just to get to normal levels. And all these drugs that he was taking were actually slowly killing him because no one realized that he did not have the growth hormone needed to heal from, so me pushing got us into seeing the endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist was like, oh, wow, you're right. But the thing is no one thought about him having a low growth hormone because he was a big kid. His dad was an NFL offensive lineman, 6'7", 300 and something pounds. And he was always in the, 85th to 95th percentile. And now he was in the 55th percentile. So it was like, you're just making up stuff now. The drama's over. You're just making up things. So I go back to what I said earlier in the conversation about parents really have to trust their gut. And you have to figure out a way to communicate that to your team in a way that they can understand. They don't have the emotional attachment to your child that you do. They're looking at it from a very clinical level, which is their job, but it's your job to help them see your child as a person, not just another case in their file.
That's so well said. I'm so interested in kind of moving into your investigation and now kind of lifelong journey into handling chronic pain. But one more question, just kind of looking back at the evolution of you, what were some of the things that helped you get through those really tough moments when maybe you didn't have hope? How did you get through day to day? How did you get through hour to hour?
Sometimes I look back on that time frame and it just is such a blur because there was so much. There wasn't time to sit and feel sorry for myself. Looking back on it now, I'm like, why did I feel more sorry for myself? But there wasn't time. I mean, we were giving meds. It was almost like having a newborn again. Some of his meds were every 4 hours. So, I would have to set an alarm, wake up in the middle of the night, make sure that he had meds. If we didn't do that, then it was going to be back into the hospital long term, which really was not good for him mentally or socially. If you can avoid long-term hospital stays, it really is better for the kids, but absolutely necessary if that's what you need. If you need round-the-clock care, I mean, I'm not saying don't go to the hospital, but that was one of the sacrifices that, we made. I was very fortunate in that I had a very hands-on mom myself, and she was willing and able to kind of drop everything she was doing and come and stay with us and help me with my younger son and kind of pick up the slack. Like if she saw that, I had been going 15 days straight on 3 hours of sleep every night, she could say, look, you go take a nap. I've got the meds, lay everything out, write down the schedule. I'll take care of it. Because, I had a husband who was working. We couldn't finance things if he quit working to take on any other roles. So I was very lucky in that I had that support system. And for a while, I had a good support system in my friend community. But this is something else that I will say, unless you've kind of been through it or you've visited it firsthand, lots of times friends start wearing out. Like, why isn't he better yet? When you're on year 3 of this, not everybody can keep stepping up, that's in your friend group. Instead of being hurt, I would say try to give those folks some grace, because if they haven't lived it, they just don't know. Yeah. They just don't know. Some of my better friends that became some of my best friends ever were some of our hospital roommate parents, because they got it. They were going through the same thing. To this day, we're still really, really good friends because I like to call it foxhole buddies. We were in the trenches together. And that would be the thing that I would say is, friends and family don't always get it. You're really, really lucky if you do have some that do. But if you can find some friends or some support in the same condition that your child has, and now with social media, with Facebook groups, or we had the Arthritis Foundation where we would go to conferences and things like that here and there. If you can find some folks that have been through some of the same things that you have, you can just kind of breathe and be like, okay, you know what? I'm not the crazy person. This happens to other people. This is not a unique experience. Is it tough? Yes, but they can also give you, tips and tricks and things. One thing that I learned, for example, was for a while, he was on a biologic. Now they don't have the preservative in there, but it was called Humira. And Humira was extremely painful. And it would burn for several minutes after you'd even get the injection. And we would do these at home. And I had one friend in a group, and she said, this is a crazy thing that an oncology nurse taught us. But if you can pop a super sour candy in their mouth right before you give them the shot, it can trick the brain into thinking, what is the bigger threat, right? And we started doing that, and it decreased the pain from that shot almost to just like a regular shot. Wow. By having that super sour candy, it tricked his brain into thinking something is really wrong. You can do it with bitter too, extremely bitter, but sour is a little bit more palatable. I never would have known that if I had not had a friend who was dealing with the same exact thing that we were dealing with every single week.
Oh man, that is so incredibly special. Those, like you said, those tips and tricks that you learn from other people who have been through it are the ones that end up being the most effective too. So he was long-term hospitalized, in pain, not only because of his medications, but also just his diagnosis in general brings pain. How did you watch him start to be able to cope with the pain? What were some of the strategies that he started doing himself that you either coached him through or taught him about?
I mean, I really have to give credit to Dr. Zeltzer for this. She was one of the first doctors that really made him feel heard. When he went to her pain clinic, he's like, everybody says that, I shouldn't be like this. It's all in my head or whatever. And she goes, well, it is in your head. but it's not psychosomatic. The pain is in your brain. And I believe you, and I want to help you get it right. We need to learn how to rewire your brain, trick your brain into feeling things differently. Pain is there for a reason. It's good because it helps your body for your body to know that something's wrong so that you can fix it. But when we can't fix it right away, or if it's not doing its job, it's just sending alerts. It's kind of like the car alarm that goes off in the parking lot. If it goes off every 5 minutes, you know that the car is not getting broken into. So you just don't even, you don't even bother with the car alarm that goes off every 5 minutes, right? She said, the pain is like that. So if I'm really trusting you, I'm going to ask for you to trust me and try some techniques and some things that you're going to think, this is stupid, this is not going to work, this is crazy, but have an open mind and give it a chance. Because if I'm believing in you, I need you to believe in me. And at that point, he was kind of like, well, I do think all this is stupid, but it can't hurt. It's been so many years that he had not felt well that he decided to give it a try. And basically the basis for what creative healing for youth in pain is what we were going through at her clinic. They called it the CAM team, the complementary and alternative medicine. And it included things like art therapy and music therapy and acupuncture and yoga, craniosacral therapy, self-hypnosis, biofeedback. There's a lot of meditation, mindfulness, just a lot of different things that you think would be out there. And how does that actually do anything, right? We know common sense that nutrition makes a difference on how good you feel, whether you're sick or well, right? Mm-hmm. We know that exercise is important. Even if you're sick, you need a certain amount of blood flow and, movement to feel well. And we know that sleep is important. So those were things that we already knew and that we were working on, but they were difficult with the pain that he had. And the nutrition and food part was difficult with the medications that he had. So we said, we've got to get some of these pain things under control before we can attack the things that we know for sure need to get fixed that we can work. So he tried acupuncture with great success. He tried all of them, to be honest, but the ones that he found the greatest success with were acupuncture, self-hypnosis, which didn't happen overnight. That took time, and it was guided with a healthcare practitioner. And a lot of physical therapy, was helpful. But the mindfulness and some of the creative healing pursuits. And the way that it was explained to us, and what I know now as the executive director of CHIP, is that there's neural pain pathways. And when they get used so often, it's kind of like a highway. It's getting stuck in this fast flow of traffic. If you're like the 30th car out of 150 cars, you can't pull off the side of the road. You can't get away in the front. You can't drop in the back. You're just getting kind of pulled through in this traffic jam. Mm. It's the same way with pain. These pain signals are happening all the time, and they just, now they're stuck. They're in the middle of this huge multi-car pileup. Dr. Zeltzer likes to call it the sticky neural loop, where these roads just keep going round and around and around, and the pain signals can't off-ramp. They can't offload. And it's proven, there's scientific research that creative healing activities, like the ones that I mentioned, including using your creativity through art and music and drama, dance, anything that's creative, it's activating a different part of your brain. And there's only so many neural pathways that can operate at one time. So if you can get those to go off and you haven't been using them previously, it takes away from the ones over here so that you can actually decrease or dampen the pain signals that are coming up to your brain. And it seems crazy. It seems way out there, but there is scientific research that backs this up. And it takes neuroplasticity into account, where using these techniques, you can rewire your brain to decrease pain signals. And when we got to that point, Grant, he couldn't believe it. He was like, this is insane. I can sit here and doodle for an hour and then I don't hurt as bad. Like, how does that work? And it does take time, and not every single thing works for every single person, but the techniques in general work, and you have to find out what works for you. And that's how creative healing for youth in pain, or what we call CHIP, was first created. When Dr. Zeltzer, she started it back in 2005, but it really started taking off in 2019 when she retired from UCLA and started running her whole child clinic and private practice just as part-time. And, what Chip was trying to do was, you remember in the early part of the story, I told you how we had a 2-year wait to get in to see Dr. Zeltzer until we could just hop on a plane with a cancellation. Chip is trying to be that buffer in between the wait times. And it's things that, since it's all online, if your child's up at 3 a.m. and they're hurting, you can flip open the computer or let them have an iPad and they can do some of these activities or some of the things, because everything that Chip has is free. And it can be the buffer or the safety net in between doctor's appointments. And I will say, it's a widespread problem. I don't think most people realize how many kids are in chronic pain. With teenagers, it's 1 out of every 3 teenagers in the US suffers from chronic pain. And
That's a high number.
Yes. And 70% of those who will not have their pain resolved because they see an average of 15 doctors. They have all kinds of other conditions that are getting, more attention, where the doctors feel like the pain isn't something that will kill them. So it's not something that needs to be addressed. It's not something that's, quote unquote, on fire right now. But those 70% that don't get it resolved in adolescence will carry it into adulthood when neuroplasticity does not have as high of a success rate. Your brain is much more plastic as a child and as an adolescent. So we're basically, out of these, 33% of all teenagers, 70% of those will carry it into adulthood when they may not be able to get it resolved in adulthood without long-term medications for the rest of their life. And so we really think that if we can address this childhood chronic pain, not only is it a great service to the quality of life for these kids, but it creates a solution for a long-term U.S. health problem. I believe I saw a study from 2015 that said it's like $400 billion gets spent on chronic pain in general.
It's just hard to even fathom those types of numbers. And it sounds like what it took for your son, especially, is this kind of like willingness to try. And I imagine you get there when you feel like you've tried everything and nothing is working. But it also really takes a supportive, open-minded parent, an advocate, or doctor to help you do that together and to say, like, yes, let's try. And I love how you talk about Chip as being the buffer between those moments, because we'll find that too, even just in waiting for getting speech therapy or seeing a psychiatrist. It happens in all types of medicine, these long waits, and we're the buffer. And I love Chip as a resource for those in chronic pain, but really as a resource to build resiliency and build good habits. It sounds incredibly effective.
It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that my son had said when people asked him, less than 1% of all college athletes make it to the NFL. And they said, what do you think is your success? Because you came from such a, your odds are astronomical to even be here. And he said, a lot of these tools, especially the self-hypnosis and the calming methodologies that I learned, have helped him so much in football that they have helped him be able to determine what's injury and what is just a pain, what's soreness versus what's injury, what things to push through, what things to not push through at all and take care of immediately. Also, he doesn't get the same kind of butterflies that some people do, like running out onto the field, because he knows how to use these calming techniques that he learned when he was ill. And he's like, I use that every single day in my career. Wow. And other people, they didn't go through that, so they don't have that. And that's another thing I would love to tell parents is, I would never have chosen this for my son. And I haven't talked much about my younger son, but he was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis in the middle of when we were going through the thick of things with Grant as well. So he had his own journey with some of these things without a mom that was very present, because I was worried about my child who might live or die this week.
Right.
Versus one that just was like, it hurts. I don't want to walk to school. I want somebody to drive me. Right.
Right.
There are silver linings in this. It may be hard to see it now. And like I said, you would never choose this for your child. But there are things lessons that you can learn as a parent, that you can learn as a person, and that your child will learn from being in these situations that will take them far in life. When you're 11 years old and you've looked death in the face, there's not a whole lot of other things to be scared about when you're 22 or 23. Can I make my car payment? We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So there are silver linings. And he's also one of the most determined people that I know. And I don't know that he would have gotten there or been there without some of the experiences that he had in this journey that he's had. So I would challenge all of you, even if you're in a really dark place or things are really, really terrible or looking bad, what good has come out of it? Not that I'm a Pollyanna, but I can tell you some of my best, what I would call lifelong friends now, 20 years in, have been from this experience, and our paths would have never crossed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things like that.
Well, thank you for being so open and honest that it wasn't always easy. And sometimes you just had to really push through. And it's not until years later that you look back and say, okay, that was really hard. How did I get through that? But then also offering a resource for people. So where can people go to CHIP? How do they get those resources? You mentioned just bringing it up on a tablet. So I assume it's just a website that people can go to?
Yes, you can go to www.mychipchyp.org, and all of our programs are there. Some of them you do need to register for. We have parenting blogs. We have monthly webinars on different conditions or different things. In fact, on our website, it'll tell you all the ones that are previous that you can register for to gain access. We've got a YouTube channel that has creative healing workshops. We've got a 2-week virtual summer camp every year that's really well received, where we have experts come in and do a creative healing experience. In fact, we're in the middle of summer camp right now. And yesterday we had our first session was all about music, and our second session was all about learning about Qigong and if that is something that can help. And we actually all did it in the comfort of our living rooms and had alterations where you could be seated or you could be lying down if you weren't well enough, and just things that you can do and you can try, things that may not necessarily be covered by insurance, all by experts. So I would say definitely come. There's all kinds of resources that we can offer. There's research, there's parenting groups, there's other organizations that we can point you to. And everything is free. We don't charge for anything.
Well, thank you so much for doing what you do. And I know you're so proud of your son, but I imagine that he's also so proud of you and what you've done for so many. Well, thank you so, so much for being here. Are there any other stories or things that you wanted to mention, either about what you've been through or CHIP, that you wanted to talk about?
I think that covers most of it. Probably everybody's tired of hearing from me at this stage.
Not at all. I feel like it just flew by and I'm like, oh goodness. Well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app, is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead and go to childlifeoncall.com/supportspot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge.
We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.